Anin, Bojo. Welcome to another episode of White Buffalo Circles at Home Edition. This week, Riley and I are going to be looking at Canada's Indigenous peoples. We're going to break it down. We're going to explore each group individually. Hope you guys enjoy. Hope you're being safe out there. Hope to see you soon. All right. Ani, Sunshine.
Ani.
How are you doing today?
Good.
Good. So today is like my fifth fifth video that we're doing today. And today we're going to talk about a word. And it's a new word. I don't know if you know about this word. The word is indigenous. Indigenous. Good job. Now, there's three groups of people in Canada, three different cultures. And really it's a lot more, but there's three that we're going to talk about today that are considered to be indigenous to these lands. Now, the way I teach kids about Indigenous peoples in Canada is to talk about our country. Now, Canada is only about 153 years old this summer. This is how old Canada is right here. And First Nations people, the Ojibwe, we've been around 15,000 years. So we've been around this long, but we've only called this place Canada for this long. And all before it was called Canada, what do our people call this place? Do you remember?
Turtle Island.
Good job. This has been Turtle Island for 15,000 years, and Canada this long. And before it was called Canada, there were three different cultures living here. Now, I've already talked about the First Nations, the Ojibwe, a lot. So I'm not going to talk much about them today. The medicine wheel is a symbol of the Ojibwe people, of the First Nations of this land. There's lots of symbols. Today we're going to talk about some other symbols. When you see a red maple leaf on a flag, what's that red maple leaf a symbol for? Do you know? When you see the red maple leaf flying in front of your school, what's that red maple leaf a symbol for?
Canada.
Good job. That red maple leaf represents our country, represents Canada. The medicine wheel, that's a symbol for First Nations people in our culture. Now, this little guy in here, he is a symbol for another group of people. And when I take him out, he might get away. He's really fast, okay? So just be careful. Don't let him escape. I'll see if I can get him out of here. Oh, geez. He's jumpy, this guy. Ow. Oh! Did I scare you? I'm just messing around. What is that thing?
Inukshuk.
Good job. Now, the Inukshuk is a symbol. It's a symbol for a group of people that live way up in the northern parts of Turtle Island in the Arctic, up by the polar bears. And when I teach kids how to say their name, I always like to use my finger. And it's obviously more fun when we have a group of kids around. But I want you to point at three different things when we say their name. So put your fingers up. And let's say in, you, it. Good. Let's say in, you, it. One more time. In, you, it. Good job. The Inuit. The Inuit have lived in the northern parts of Turtle Island for about 6,000 years. That's a pretty long time. First Nations, 15,000. Inuit, 6,000. And the third group is even shorter than that. Europeans didn't get here till about 500 years ago. So that's how long Europeans have been here. And that's how long this place has been called Canada. So the Inukshuk is a symbol for a group of people called the Inuit. And the Inukshuk played a very important purpose in their culture. Sunshine, where they live up in the north, there's not big trees like around here. Because when you go far up into the north, the ground is frozen all year. It's called permafrost. And what you don't see in that big tree right there is the huge root system underground. If a tree gets really, really big, the roots need to go deep down into Mother Earth to hold up that big tree, or it'll just blow over. So if the ground is frozen all year in the north, then the roots can't grow deep and the trees can't grow big. So the Inuit didn't have a lot of trees and therefore not a lot of wood to build their homes. So what would happen if the Inuit made a trail through their lands and it snowed over top of the trail, you wouldn't be able to see the trail anymore, and it'd be easy to get lost. It's not like the bush where you can see the trail winding through the trees. So what the Inuit would do is they'd build these inukshuks really big, 10, 12 feet high, and they would place them along the different trails. So there'd be a inukshuk at the village. There, off in the horizon, there'd be another inukshuk, and then you go to that inukshuk and you look over, and there's another inukshuk, and that one might lead you to the hunting grounds or to the fishing grounds or to a neighboring community. So the inukshuks marked the trails for the Inuit people, and they also gave them direction as far as east and west goes, because it's my understanding that usually the arms would point in the east to west bearing, so you'd know the directions as well. The inukshuk was very important for getting around in the north because it helped people get to where they were going, mark the trails, kind of like street signs. Have you ever seen one of these before? What is that? It's a round house made from ice and snow. Have you ever seen one before?
An
No?
igloo.
Ah, good job, Sunshine. That's an igloo. Now, the igloo is the traditional home of the Inuit people. A long time ago, again, there's not a lot of wood up in the northern parts of Turtle Island, so they would make their homes out of ice and snow. And they would hunt a lot of meat up there, a lot of fish and whales. They invented kayaks, so they would paddle out into the ocean, and they would harpoon different types of seals and creatures. Obviously, polar bears live up there, and they make those inukshuks really, really big. Now, when you build an inukshuk, it's kind of like Lego. You get a whole bunch of blocks of ice and snow, and then you build a big circle, and then you build another circle on top, and another circle on top, and another circle on top, until you got yourself a nice looking igloo. And they would always leave a little hole in the top, so the smoke from their fire could get out of the top of the igloo. And once the fire would melt a little bit of the ice on the inside of the igloo, it would create a shell, a hard layer, so nothing could bust through the igloo and get into the people that were inside. The Inuit always had dogs. This is a dog, not just any dog. The Inuit people had big, beautiful Malamute huskies. They almost look like wolves, giant, beautiful dogs that love to run. So each family would have about 5, 6, maybe 8 dogs. Every family would have 8 dogs. And then when it was time to travel, they would hook the dogs up to the sled and get onto the back of the sled and hold on tight. And those dogs would take off all across the snow, take them everywhere that they were going when they were going hunting or traveling. So huskies and dogs were also a very big part, are also a very big part of the Inuit culture. Today, the Inuit get wood shipped up there, and they live in regular houses like me and you, and they have snow machines like we have here in Sudbury. But back then, it was the igloo, and it was transportation by dog sleds. Now, their clothes, if you see in that first picture, their clothes were made from fur and leather, just like the leather here on my bundle. And these are some mitts my dad gave me a long time ago. These are mitts made from moose hide. Now, the Inuit, they would make their clothing mostly out of caribou, because they got lots of caribou in the north. And on the inside, they would put nice seal skin. Now, the Ojibwe, we had clothes a lot like this too. We didn't have all these fancy materials like we got today, so we made our clothes also out of leather and furs, except around here we would use moose hide for our winter clothes, and on the inside we would put rabbit fur to make it nice and soft and warm. So those are some mitts that my dad had made a long time ago. I like to show the kids those mitts because they're very beautiful, and they just give a good example of the type of clothing that we used to wear back then. So the Inuit, been around 6,000 years. They are indigenous. They are from these lands, right? They've been here a very long time. So First Nations, we are indigenous. That's our symbol. Inuit, they are indigenous. This is their symbol, the Inukshuk. And when you talk about a singular person who is Inuit, you say Inuk, because Inuit means the people, but Inuk is a person. Now these guys are a little bit harder to explain. These guys are called the Métis. You say
Métis.
Say Métis.
Métis.
Métis, good job. Now Métis is just a word, it's a French word. And Métis, the word small m Métis, means mixed ancestry, mixed blood. So most of us in these lands today, we have some sort of mixed ancestry. Like me and you, we have English, a little bit of English and Irish ancestry in our blood on my mom's side. Um, but that's obviously not who is Indigenous, because if mixed ancestry people were Indigenous, then all Canadians would be Indigenous. When we're talking about Indigenous people and the Métis, we're talking about capital M, the Métis Nation. That is the Indigenous group of people recognized by our government today. Now, this is what happened, Sunshine. Very, very long time ago, when Europeans first started to come over to Turtle Island and settle on these lands, a lot of those guys were French. And one of the big businesses back then was fur. The fur trade was a humongous deal in the early colonial, the settler times. This is beaver fur. And this is the most commonly traded fur during the fur trade times, the beaver fur. There was 400 million beavers in Turtle Island when the Europeans arrived here, and today there's only about 4 million beavers left. So a lot of beaver furs traveled across the ocean. And you got to remember, Europeans didn't know Turtle Island was here. When they discovered 100 million people here in Turtle Island across 500 nations 500 years ago, what they called this place was the New World, because they didn't even know this place existed until then. So if you could get a beaver fur coat, only the kings and queens and very rich people could afford a coat from the New World. So beaver fur and different furs from Turtle Island were a very high commodity, very high traded back then. And it made a lot of money. It was a huge industry back then. It would rival the gas and pharmaceutical companies today, the fur trade industry. So these French guys, they were fur traders, and they worked for fur trading companies like the Hudson Bay Company. And their job was to travel through the rivers and lakes of Turtle Island, make friends with the First Nations people, and trade for fur. Now, there was an original problem, because when the French guys first wanted to get some fur, they got into a little canoe and they paddled down the river to the Ojibwe village. And when they met the Ojibwe people, we were very friendly, so we shook their hand and welcomed them to our village and invited them in for a nice meal. And those French guys were looking around during dinner, and they saw wolf fur and bear fur and fox fur and deer fur and beautiful furs all over the village. And when dinner was done, they said to the chief or to the elders, they said, "I love your furs. They are absolutely beautiful. I would like to buy your furs off of you." So here is $1,000. Is that a good deal, Sunshine? They want to get all these furs and they want to pay $1,000. Is that a good deal? That's a pretty good deal. That's a lot of money. But this is another big difference between the First Nations and the Europeans. Our people didn't use money to buy things. To the French guy, this piece of paper, this is $1,000. But to the Ojibwe, what is this really?
A paper.
It's a piece of paper, right? What am I supposed to do with this? I can't eat it. I can't hunt with it. It's not going to feed my family. Maybe I could blow my nose, right? This is useless to me. So these French guys wanted to take all my beautiful fur that I'd worked very hard to get, and they wanted to trade me a piece of paper. So no, we said, no, we don't want your piece of paper. That's a terrible deal. But what those French guys did have was different things made from metal. So what we said is, hey, if you want our fur, you go get some of those neat things you brought over here to Turtle Island, come back, and then we'll talk about a trade. So that was the beginning of the fur trade. For hundreds of years, this happened, this trading agreement between French and later Scottish European ancestors and, well, different types of Europeans that came to this land with the First Nations people. Now, if you were going to be a Métis fur trader back then, Sunshine, you had to be very strong and you had to be very brave as well. They were traveling down rivers and lakes that they've never been down before. They were basically exploring Turtle Island, and that takes a lot of courage. But our people were very territorial. So if we thought people were coming into our land to hunt on our territory or steal from us or fight or cause trouble, then we might shoot at them, shoot at the strangers. So the Métis came up with this symbol to let us know that they were friends. So go like this, Sunshine. Make a circle with one hand like this. This circle represents the First Nations people in our culture. Now with this hand, do another circle. This circle represents those French guys in their culture. And when you put them together, they make that infinity symbol. So that's what that symbol is those two cultures coming together in a never-ending relationship. That infinity symbol, the French, those European settlers and the First Nations. And you can see that symbol on my flag back here. So when they were paddling down the river and they'd see First Nations people on the shore, they'd go like this to let them know that they were friends, they weren't here to cause trouble or steal, and they just wanted to trade. But pretty soon what they did, instead of having to make that symbol all the time, they just took that symbol and they put it onto that big flag that you see behind me, and this big flag right here. This is the Métis flag, and this is the very first flag to ever fly in the interior rivers and lakes of Turtle Island. And those guys were off going to look for furs. Way before that red maple leaf was even a thought, this flag was flying around Turtle Island during the fur trade times.
Was that an eagle flag?
This one back here is a Thunderbird, the Anishinaabe flag. We'll talk about that in another video. But today we're looking at the Métis and the Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. Now, the Métis also suffered a lot of injuries. This became a big part of their culture as well. And it is also kind of a symbol of the Métis culture and history. A lot of kids say scarf, and it looks like a giant scarf. So I understand why you would say that. But actually, this is called a sash.
All right.
Can you say sash? Sash. This is a pretty good example of a traditional sash. They're usually about 14 feet long. They were finger woven, hand woven sashes with a really fine thread. What my buddy Scott told me, it takes about 800 hours to make a traditional sash the way that they did back then. So that was a huge amount of work. Now, if it was really cold out, of course, you could use the sash as a scarf, right? And if it was really hot out, you could tie it around your forehead. You could make it like a bandana, keep the sweat out of your head. There was all sorts of different purposes for the sash. But the main reason for this sash was so that they didn't hurt their backs. A lot of Métis actually died from something called a hernia. A hernia is a really bad injury in your midsection here. If you lift something that's too heavy or you twist or slip, part of your belly can pop through the muscles. It doesn't come right out of your stomach, but all of a sudden you'll be lifting something and you'll feel a pain. Oh, and you look down and you'll feel a bump in your tummy, and that's a hernia. And today, if we get a hernia, we can go to the hospital. The doctor will push it back in and fix it. No big deal. But back then, if you got a hernia, the muscle would pinch the intestine, and in about 2 or 3 weeks, the infection would spread through your body and you would die from that hernia. So it's very important that you didn't hurt your back and you didn't get a hernia. So the Métis sash, what they would do is they would take the sash and they would wrap it around their midsection a whole bunch of times, and they would tie it tight as you could. That way, when you were lifting up all those heavy things and carrying the fur packs over the slippery rocks across Turtle Island, you didn't hurt your back, you didn't get a hernia. And then you could tuck your pipe in there on the side, you could tuck your knife in over here, you could tie your cup up onto your sash. At nighttime, you could sleep on a nice hard rock or the wood, which is not very comfortable. But if you had your sash, you could just ball up your sash, and then you got yourself a nice little pillow to sleep on at nighttime. In the morning, you go down to the river, keep this side dry, and get this side wet. Now you got yourself a washcloth. You could wash up, get yourself all cleaned up for the day. This side's dry, so you got yourself a towel over here. Dry yourself off. I seen a picture of one Métis fur trader. He took his sash and he turned it into a bowl, and he put his beans in his bowl, in his sash, and he was having breakfast, eating it right out of his sash. Wash it off, put it back on, good as new. And the sash also has different colors and different patterns. Do you see that? It's kind of pretty, right? And it's a lot like the Scottish culture. It's my understanding that each family would have its own unique pattern, kind of like a Scottish tartan. So you could see somebody's sash from far away, and you would know their family just based on the colors of their sash. And I even heard one thing where if you wore the sash loose on one side, that meant that you were married. And if you wore it loose on the other side, that meant that you were still available. So available, you were still single, you were looking for a partner. So the sash had all sorts of purposes for the Métis, most importantly though, to protect their back. So those are Canada's Indigenous peoples. Let's say First Nations.
First Nation.
Inuit.
Inuit.
And Métis.
Métis.
Yeah. The Métis culture, it probably formed about 300 years ago. What's unique is with the Métis, they were French guys. They met First Nations women and they had children. And the children, their dad was French, their mom was First Nations. And over 300 years of this fur trading relationship, the Métis Nation was born. They have their own language. It's called Michif. You say Michif? Michif, yeah, it's kind of a cross between French and Ojibwe, this unique language, Michif. And you need that to be considered a nation. They have their own land base, they have their own governing system, they have their own culture, they have their own way of doing things as far as economics go. So the Métis Nation is a nation that was born here in Turtle Island during those 300 years of fur trading with the Europeans. So it's a very unique and new nation to Mother Earth, but they are considered to be one of our Indigenous peoples. So let's say it one more time. First Nation.
Nation.
Inuit.
Inuit.
Métis.
Métis.
Good job, Sunshine. Those are Canada's Indigenous peoples. And that is all we got for today. So, Bamapi, we'll see you next time. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that short teaching on Canada's Indigenous peoples. As usual, if you have any questions, you can post them under the comments section, or you can have your teacher email me directly. Hope you're being safe. Hope to see you soon. Bamapi.